Hello everyone, and welcome back to my Zero to Hero Challenge, Episode 3, where the goal of the challenge is to hit a Mythic Plus rating of 2500 starting from 0 through the use of pugs only. I finished off last week with a rating of 1071 and an item level of 433. Starting off the week as always, I opened up my Great Vault to see what treasures laid inside. I only had 2 slots unlocked in the vault, and the choices were not too good either. I could pick between some braces which I already had, or some of the hero track legs that I can catalyze into tier gear. I decided to go with the latter. With the Great Vault done, I then quickly went to complete my weekly Super Bloom and Worthy Ally quest in the Emerald Dream to see what rewards I could get from those. From the Super Bloom, just like last week, I got another one-handed axe, but this time at a 447 item level, and the Worthy Ally quest granted me a 441 item level ring, which wasn't an item level upgrade, but was on a higher track level. This took my item level up to 436. With the initial weekly stuff out of the way, it was time to grind some rating. My first key, a plus 14 Crest Manor. I quickly formed a group through the dungeon finder, and whilst waiting for it to fill, chose to enchant some of my gear. The affixes for this week are Tyrannical, Storming, and Raging. I'm not too familiar with the route of Crest Manor, as I've not tanked it before, so my route could have been better. The start of the dungeon was rather uneventful. We killed the first boss and began clearing our way around the second boss's room. After the room was clear, instead of going for the boss, I decided I'd keep clearing trash until Bloodlust was off cooldown. Whilst clearing trash around Ral the Gluttonous's room, I got a little bit too greedy and overpulled. This was made worse by the fact that I used my Fell Devastate ability, which locked me in place just as the Dinner Bell cast was going off, causing me to get hit, taking damage and silencing me. I did try to stay alive, jumping backwards and popping darkness, as all of my other CDs were down. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite enough, and I died with the rest of the group following. We were released, ran back, and I made 2 more pulls on trash while waiting for the Bloodlust cooldown. Once Bloodlust was off cooldown, I pulled the Soulbound Goliath, a relatively simple boss, but as I'd never tanked this boss before, I wasn't too sure how hard it was going to hit, and at what level of stacks I'd need to run him into fire to reset them. I went with resetting his stacks at around the 25 to 30 stacks mark. During the fight, our mage did die during the Soul Thorn ability, which occurred just after I dragged the boss into flames. In hindsight, I should have waited for the Thorn to be killed first before resetting the boss's stacks. Despite this, we killed it after rezzing the mage. For the rest of the dungeon, we only had 1 more death. On Lord and Lady Werecrest, our rogue stood in a few too many puddles, letting his health get too low, and the ability from Lady Werecrest finishing him off. We rezzed them and killed the boss. The final boss was incredibly easy. However, I didn't have enough enemy forces, missing 0.33%. Once the final boss was dead, we teleported to the start of the dungeon and killed the first mob we could find, completing the dungeon but just missing the +2 timer. This raised my rating to 1267, and I was fortunate enough to get a 460 item level ring, taking my total item level up to 438. In between dungeons, I spent some of my flight stones and crests to upgrade my item level further to 439, mainly focusing on upgrading my weapons. The next dungeon was a Blackrook Hold 15. This dungeon went very smoothly, with only 4 deaths occurring throughout the run. Unlike last week, I didn't go splat on the initial pulls. I did, however, die whilst climbing the stairs with the spiders after the first boss. I should have slowed down to build resources before moving on up to the second set of spiders. I died, and the rest of the group didn't, as they kited the mobs and killed them while waiting for me to run back. Our second death occurred whilst climbing the second set of stairs after the second boss. The mage poked his head around the corner to the stairs and immediately took a boulder to the face and died. Other than this one death, we reached the third boss without issue. On the third boss, I did something rather stupid, because I thought I could tank it. I already had a debuff from the boss's charge ability, and so did our mage. Our mage was targeted again by the charge, and like the hero I am, leaped in front of it, thinking I could take a second stack. Unfortunately, I forgot to account for 2 things. First, the mage had Ice Block, and second, The tank buster greatly increases the amount of physical damage I take. This, coupled with the charge debuff I already had, one-shot me. I died whilst watching the mage stay safe inside of their ice block. He did at least thank me for my sacrifice. I did get rezzed and we finished off the boss without any further issues. The final death of the dungeon was during the final boss's intermission phase, Dreadlord's Guise. Our hunter ended up being clipped by the lasers and dying. I believe he may have disengaged into them. After the intermission ended, we rezzed him and killed the boss, 2-chesting the key, further increasing my rating to 1347 and getting a 463 item level helm, which I converted into tier at the catalyst to obtain my tier 31 2-set bonus. My key upgraded into a 17 Throne of the Tides. I quickly formed a group and started the key. I'm not a big fan of this dungeon, as the start of the dungeon just feels like one big massive slog through trash, but nevertheless I soldiered on. The group I created was lacking a lust, so I did make sure to grab some drums before we started the dungeon. The dungeon started off great, with us clearing the trash without any problems, at least until we went up the elevator and cleared the gauntlet of mobs to the room where the second boss spawns. As I didn't want to overpool here, I wanted to line of sight the mobs out of the room. However, the warrior didn't seem to notice this, charged in anyway, taking aggro from some of the mobs and getting himself killed. This was the warrior's first mistake of a few. Once the warrior managed to regroup with us, he didn't last too long once again and died rather quickly to casts. It was here where the healer began to get a little triggered towards the DPS about none of them interrupting the casts. A valid point he made for sure, but he definitely could have put it into more polite words. The priest even threatened to leave if the group didn't interrupt. 2 deaths in, with many more to come. After we cleared this pack, I pulled the pack on the right side of the room while the patrol was away, hoping to kite them back into a position where we could kill them alone. However, the patrol did end up getting pulled. I tried to interrupt the cast as best as I could, but there's only so much I can do by myself. The healer got hit by a few casts and eventually fell. With the healer down, I tried to keep myself up, but the damage was a little too much and I died at roughly the same time as the pack. It took a while for the paladin to decide to res me here, but he eventually did. A little bit of a messy section, but we got through it, clearing and killing the first boss without any more deaths, leaving us at a total of 4 deaths by the time we reached the second boss. We did have 1 death on this boss, from the warrior. He dropped low while the oozes were awake and got finished off by the shockwave. My positioning and movement for this boss weren't the best and definitely could have been better too, but as it was my first time tanking the encounter, it wasn't too terrible, I thought. Despite being a DPS dead, we killed the boss and had 7.5 minutes remaining on the timer. There were no deaths while clearing to the 3rd boss. However, I was a little concerned with this next boss, as it is a tyrannical weak and my item level is a little low. I know this boss can hit incredibly hard during its Storm Flurry totem being active. I prepared myself for this in advance and planned out my defensive abilities for each one. The first totem went great and died rather quickly. However, we lost the warrior to the Earth Fury cast just after. Losing a DPS here means the totems would live longer, making it more difficult for me. I did manage to survive the second totem, however it did last a long time due to being a DPS down. Just before the 3rd totem, we combat res the warrior, however the damage this time was a little too much for me and I died. The rest of the group slowly followed. We released and ran back, and I asked the priest to give me a pain suppression on the 3rd totem cast on the next attempt. The 2nd attempt went much better, no one died, and we killed the boss with a little over 7 minutes left on the timer, making the dungeon still possible to time, but difficult. The first packs on the way to the final boss gave us no trouble. However, I got a little too close to the final set of goblins and ended up aggroing them. I should have silenced them here, but for some reason I didn't. They all got off their Aquablast cast, which killed me instantly. Naturally, the rest of the group would follow, and I ran back to grab the mobs before they reset. I did eventually manage to re-establish aggro and finish them off, but not before everyone else had died. Despite being alone, I managed to keep myself alive while the rest of the group ran back, caught up to me, and we killed all the goblins. On the final pack before the final boss, the 2 big tainted sentries was painful. We lost the warrior here yet again when they both casted their swell ability, but other than the warrior's death, we killed them and got to the final boss with a little over 2 minutes to spare. During the final boss, it was painfully obvious that the warrior didn't know the mechanics or strategy for the fight. When the boss targeted him with the blotting barrage, instead of stacking it close together with the rest of the group, he chose to leap away and drop it on the edge of the room, which caused us to be unable to clear the room efficiently. The healer then died shortly after, just as the ad spawned. I eventually fell not too long after with the rest of the group. It was at this point that we all released and the healer left, failing the key and downgrading it to a Throne of Tides 16. I left the group and made a new one for the now downgraded key. A little disappointed that we didn't get to finish the previous key. Fortunately, this time the run went much better and much smoother, with only one death occurring throughout the entire run of the dungeon. The death occurred on the final boss of the dungeon. After we killed the ads that are spawned during the encounter, they explode. The healer stood inside of this explosion and died. However, he was quickly combat rezzed. Other than this one, there wasn't any others, and we ended up finishing off the dungeon, increasing my key level by 2 and my Mythic Plus rating to 1566. In this dungeon, I did get no loot, however the paladin didn't want his neck that had dropped. It would have been a great upgrade over my 402 item level neck, however I lost the role to the hunter. I still needed to complete one more dungeon to unlock the second slot in my vault, so I decided that I would go for my newly upgraded key, an 18 Dark Heart Thicket. I did have some reservations about the first boss, but decided to give it a go. As a side note, after filming this, I have learned that you can sidestep the follow-up charge from the boss, which is what I will be doing in any future runs. Our first death of the run happened on the first boss at around the 50% mark. The boss had just finished the Tank Buster and Grievous Leap, and around this time our Demon Hunter died. Fortunately, we had a druid to combat res him, and we continued to fight the boss. The Demon Hunter did die a second time on this encounter towards the end at around the 10% mark. He moved in front of the boss just as the Primal Rampage was about to cast, got hit by the frontal from it, and died. But as the boss was already very low, it wasn't too worrying and we finished him off rather quickly. If I could tank this boss, I knew the rest of the dungeon wasn't going to be too bad. The next death occurred while clearing towards Oakheart, the second boss of the dungeon. I got a little too greedy with the pulls, and also got hit by a Root Burst ability which finished me off. The rest of the group kited the mobs back towards me as I ran towards them, re-establishing aggro on them, and then we finished off the remaining Vile Thorn Blossoms. We finished clearing all the way to Oakheart without any problems, and managed to kill Oakheart himself without any deaths. This run was going much smoother than my run of the previous. The next death that occurred was on the Blood-Tainted Fury just after the second boss. Here we all got hit by the falling blood orb, taking everyone down to 50% health. I leaped back in, only to get hit by the charge. The shaman was also hit by the charge, and he died. Other than this death, we had no more deaths until we reached Dresseron. We reached Dresseron and killed him rather quickly, with just under 15 minutes remaining on the keep. Whilst clearing towards the final boss, we had one more death on the final pack just before the Shade of Xaviers. Just after finishing off the bats, I was getting very low from the disease they put on me and had to quickly eat food to prevent myself from dying. The shaman and the demon hunter didn't notice this and charged into the next pack. Once I knew I wasn't going to die, I ran in to grab aggro, but not before the shaman had gotten the debuff from the bat, which killed him. Once I had aggro, however, the pack fell rather easily. We rezzed the shaman and moved on to the final boss of the dungeon with 12 minutes remaining. The Shade of Xaviers was relatively smooth, especially compared to the attempts of the previous week that I ran this dungeon, despite this week being a tyrannical week. Now knowing about the buff the boss gets from standing in the swirl during the second phase, I did attempt to keep him out of them. However, this is easier said than done, as the boss is often immovable when he is casting Feed on the weak. When the boss was below 5%, he targeted the shaman with this ability, while the stacks were rather high, and unfortunately our healer got feared just as this was occurring, causing the shaman to drop very low and then dying to the ongoing AoE damage of the fight. The boss fell very shortly after, upgrading the key by 2 levels once again, which I was very happy with, raising my Mythic Plus rating to a total of 1681 and also granting me a 467 item level ring, which while not having the best stats, it is still a good upgrade for me. This rose my item level up to 446. To summarize this week, I gained over 600 rating, taking me to a total of 1,681, and also gained 13 item levels, taking me to a total of 446. A very good week for me overall, and I was pleasantly surprised we managed to 2-chest a plus 18 key. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to run the 20 key that it gave me afterwards. I will, however, be getting some mythic track gear showing up in my vault for the following week. That's all for this episode. If you did enjoy the video, please do give it a like, comment and subscribe, as it really does help out the channel. See you next time, and have a good one.